Poor people are told that the richest people in the world stay humble and avoid showing off their wealth or demanding special treatment. What if I told you that humility device is actually a control mechanism designed to keep poor people quiet while wealthy people master the art of status display? This sounds wise because we see stories about arrogant rich people failing, and we're taught that pride comes before a fall. But something's wrong when the people giving humility advice own private jets and demand VIP treatment everywhere they go. Everyone knows that truly successful people don't show off their wealth or act superior to others. You see motivational quotes about staying humble, working quietly, and letting success speak for itself. Why do the people who preach humility the loudest seem to live in the most ostentatious mansions and travel in the most expensive cars? This sounds like wisdom because we're told that flashy displays of wealth are tasteless and that real class means understatement. We're taught that boasting is unattractive and that modest people earn more respect than show-offs. But something doesn't fit when humble advice comes from people wearing $1,000 watches while telling you materialism doesn't matter. The humility trap works by teaching poor people to hide their ambitions and minimize their achievements, while wealthy people learn sophisticated status, signaling that appears humble but actually demonstrates power. While poor people are told to stay in their lane, wealthy people master the art of displaying dominance through understated luxury. If this kind of social control disguised as moral guidance interests you, subscribe to Prof. John Explained and share this video with someone who's been told they need to be more humble, they need to understand how humility functions as a class control mechanism. The system creates fundamentally different rules about appropriate behavior depending on your economic position. When we talk about humility, we mean completely different things for different social classes. For wealthy people, humility means displaying power through understatement rather than obvious showing off. They learn to signal status through exclusive experiences, insider knowledge, and cultural sophistication. For poor people, humility means accepting their position without complaint. They're taught to be grateful for what they have and avoid appearing ambitious or demanding. Think about how wealthy people discuss their achievements versus how poor people are expected to discuss theirs. This explains something curious about social expectations. The same behavior that gets praised when wealthy people do it gets criticized when poor people attempt it. The difference isn't about character or values. It creates systematically different social permissions where confidence becomes arrogance depending on who displays it. But here's where it gets interesting. The humility trap doesn't just police individual behavior. It actually restructures how different social classes are allowed to occupy space and demand attention. Consider how wealthy people move through the world. They expect the best tables at restaurants. They demand immediate attention from service staff. They assume their opinions matter in any conversation. This isn't considered arrogant when wealthy people do it. It's called having standards, knowing your worth, or being confident. Poor people who display the same expectations get labeled as entitled, demanding, or having attitude problems. The behavioral double standard ensures that wealthy people can claim space and attention while poor people learn to make themselves smaller. This conditioning also affects what economists call presence permission. Wealthy people are taught that their presence is valuable and should be acknowledged. Poor people are taught that their presence is conditional and should be minimized, unless specifically invited. The presence training also creates what sociologists call spatial authority differences. Wealthy people learn to take up space physically and conversationally. Poor people learn to minimize their physical presence and conversational contributions to avoid appearing pushy or inappropriate. But the humility trap becomes even more sophisticated when we examine how different social classes learn to discuss money and success. Wealthy people learn to talk about their achievements through what sociologists call strategic humility. They minimize their role while highlighting the advantages they've created. They'll say things like, "I've been fortunate," while describing businesses they built or investments they made. The humility language masks the agency, while the substance reveals the power. Poor people learn to apologize for their successes. They minimize their achievements and attribute everything to luck rather than acknowledging their effort or skill. This linguistic conditioning ensures that wealthy people maintain authority even when appearing modest, while poor people diminish their authority even when they deserve recognition. The language training also affects what psychologists call achievement ownership. Wealthy people learn to own their successes subtly, while poor people learn to disown their successes completely. The ownership conditioning also creates what economists call credit attribution asymmetry. Wealthy people learn to accept praise gracefully while redirecting attention to their strategic thinking. Poor people learn to deflect praise entirely and redirect all credit to external factors beyond their control. Do you notice how wealthy people can discuss their accomplishments without seeming boastful, while poor people get accused of bragging for mentioning basic achievements? The humility trap also exploits what behavioral economists call attention asymmetry. Wealthy people are taught that commanding attention is natural and appropriate. Poor people are taught that seeking attention is selfish and inappropriate. They learn to wait to be noticed rather than demanding recognition. This attention management creates fundamentally different relationships with visibility. Wealthy people expect to be seen and heard. Poor people expect to remain invisible until summoned. The visibility conditioning affects career advancement, relationship building, and social influence. People who don't seek attention rarely receive opportunities that require visibility. Meanwhile, wealthy people understand that controlling attention and managing perception are essential skills for maintaining and expanding influence. They learn sophisticated techniques for drawing focus without appearing desperate for attention. The attention mastery also creates what sociologists call narrative control advantages. Wealthy people learn to shape conversations and direct discussions toward their expertise areas. Poor people learn to follow conversational leads set by others rather than introducing topics that showcase their knowledge or experience. But there's something even more insidious about how the humility trap affects social mobility through networking and relationship building. Wealthy people learn to present themselves as interesting and valuable conversation partners. They share stories about travel, experiences, and connections that demonstrate their social capital. Poor people learn that talking about their experiences is boastful. They're taught to ask questions and listen rather than contribute interesting stories or insights. This conversational positioning ensures that wealthy people become the center of attention in social situations, while poor people become the audience. The networking asymmetry affects relationship formation. People remember and invite back the individuals who make conversations interesting, not the ones who stay quietly in the background. Wealthy people understand that successful networking requires making themselves memorable and valuable to others. Poor people are taught that successful humility means making others feel comfortable by diminishing themselves. The relationship building also creates what economists call social capital accumulation. Differences. Wealthy people build networks through mutual value exchange. Poor people attempt to build networks through service and deference, which creates subordinate rather than equal relationships. Can you think of any successful business leader who built their influence by staying quiet and avoiding attention rather than commanding respect through visible expertise? The system also creates what sociologists call gratitude asymmetry. Poor people are expected to express constant gratitude for basic treatment. Wealthy people are taught that excellent treatment is their natural right and doesn't require special acknowledgement. This gratitude conditioning affects how each group responds to opportunities and treatment from others. Poor people spend time and energy expressing appreciation for standard service. Wealthy people spend that same energy evaluating whether the service meets their standards. The energy allocation difference affects how each group approaches new opportunities and relationship building. The gratitude training also creates what psychologists call expectation calibration differences. Poor people learn to lower expectations to avoid disappointment and appear grateful. Wealthy people learn to maintain high expectations because excellent treatment should be standard rather than exceptional. The humility trap also exploits temporal discounting differences between social classes to maintain appropriate behavior expectations. Poor people are taught to be grateful for present treatment because future opportunities might not come. This creates excessive appreciation for minimal consideration. Wealthy people are taught to evaluate present treatment based on their long-term value and future potential. This creates appropriate standards and expectations. The temporal framework. Difference affects negotiation behavior and relationship boundaries. Poor people accept poor treatment because they're grateful for any attention. Wealthy people demand appropriate treatment because they understand their ongoing value. The temporal orientation also affects what economists call relationship investment strategies. Poor people invest heavily in maintaining current relationships, even when they're one-sided. Wealthy people evaluate relationships based on mutual benefit and future potential rather than past gratitude. Have you ever noticed how wealthy people can demand better service without being called difficult, while poor people get labeled as problems for requesting basic fairness? The system also creates what behavioral economists call complaint permission asymmetry. Wealthy people are allowed to express dissatisfaction when standards aren't met. Poor people are expected to accept whatever they receive without complaint. Expressing dissatisfaction gets labeled as ingratitude or having a bad attitude. This complaint conditioning affects everything from workplace treatment to service quality to relationship dynamics. The permission difference ensures that wealthy people receive better treatment because they're allowed to demand it, while poor people receive worse treatment because they're trained to accept it. The complaint training also creates what sociologists call feedback loop advantages. Wealthy people's complaints lead to improved service and better outcomes. Poor people's silence about poor treatment ensures that poor treatment continues and often worsens over time. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the humility trap is how it handles the relationship between confidence and social permission. Wealthy people learn that confidence is attractive and necessary for success. They're taught to believe in their own value and communicate that belief to others. Poor people learn that confidence is arrogance and makes others uncomfortable. They're taught to doubt their value and avoid asserting their worth. This confidence conditioning creates fundamentally different approaches to opportunity and relationship building. The confidence asymmetry also affects what psychologists call social risk tolerance. Wealthy people learn to take social risks because confidence is rewarded in their environment. Poor people learn to avoid social risks because confidence is punished in their environment. The risk tolerance difference affects career advancement, relationship formation, and influence building over time. The confidence training also creates what economists call negotiation positioning advantages. Wealthy people enter negotiations believing they deserve good outcomes. Poor people enter negotiations grateful for any consideration and willing to accept poor terms rather than risk losing opportunities entirely. The humility trap also creates what economists call status signaling sophistication asymmetry. Wealthy people learn complex systems for displaying status without appearing vulgar. They understand designer brands, exclusive experiences, cultural references, and social codes that communicate their position subtly but effectively. Poor people are taught that any status display is inappropriate. They learn to avoid appearing ambitious or successful even when they achieve something meaningful. The signaling sophistication difference affects how each group builds and maintains social position. The status display also creates what sociologists call cultural capital demonstration advantages. Wealthy people learn to showcase knowledge, taste, and connections that reinforce their social position. Poor people learn to hide knowledge or interests that might appear pretentious or above their supposed station. Consider how the humility trap handles the relationship between individual behavior and systemic social positioning. Every time poor people practice excessive humility, they reinforce the social hierarchy that keeps them in subordinate positions. Every time wealthy people practice strategic humility, they maintain authority while appearing modest and reasonable. The behavioral pattern creates a system where inequality gets reinforced through what appears to be virtuous behavior. The systemic effect is that poor people's humility enables wealthy people's dominance while maintaining the illusion that everyone follows the same moral standards. The behavioral reinforcement also creates what economists call hierarchy maintenance automation. The social system maintains itself through individual choices that appear voluntary. Poor people choose humility because they believe it's virtuous. Wealthy people choose strategic positioning because they understand it's effective. The humility trap also creates what sociologists call moral framework asymmetry. Poor people learn that humility is a character virtue that makes them better people. Wealthy people learn that humility is a strategic tool that makes them more effective in achieving their goals. This framework difference affects how each group approaches social interaction and personal development. The moral versus strategic orientation ensures that poor people focus on being good while wealthy people focus on being effective. The framework difference also creates what psychologists call outcome evaluation asymmetry. Poor people measure success through moral satisfaction from virtuous behavior. Wealthy people measure success through actual results and achieved goals rather than adherence to moral principles. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the humility trap is how it convinces people that social hierarchy is based on character rather than circumstance. Poor people who struggle with confidence or assertiveness are told they need to work on their self-esteem and personal development. But the real problem isn't individual psychology. The problem is a social system that punishes confidence in some people while rewarding it in others. This psychological explanation prevents recognition, that humility expectations serve social control rather than character development. The individual focus also creates what economists call systemic blindness. Poor people work on changing themselves rather than recognizing that the system punishes their confidence while rewarding wealthy people's confidence. This blindness ensures that effort goes toward individual adjustment rather than systemic change or resistance. The humility trap ultimately works because it offers the psychological satisfaction of virtue while systematically preventing poor people from accessing the behavioral tools necessary for social advancement. Understanding this mechanism doesn't necessarily mean abandoning humility entirely. Rather, it suggests learning to distinguish between humility as virtue and humility as social control. The trap continues because it serves essential hierarchy maintenance functions while appearing to provide universal moral guidance about appropriate behavior. Understanding how humility functions differently across social classes reveals that building influence might require confidence and assertiveness rather than modesty and self-deprecation. The humility trap demonstrates how social systems can maintain inequality by teaching different behavioral standards to different social classes while presenting these differences as universal moral principles. This pattern reveals how modern societies use moral frameworks to maintain social hierarchies while preserving the illusion that everyone operates under the same behavioral expectation and moral standards. The sophisticated mechanism ensures that social control operates through internalized moral beliefs rather than external enforcement, making resistance more difficult and hierarchy maintenance more efficient. This moral internalization creates what economists call voluntary compliance with advantageous systems. Poor people choose behaviors that disadvantage them because they believe these behaviors reflect good character. The voluntary nature of the compliance makes a system more stable and legitimate than systems that require obvious force or coercion to maintain hierarchy. The moral framework also creates what sociologists call righteousness satisfaction. Poor people feel good about their humility even when it prevents their advancement because they believe they're demonstrating superior character. This righteousness satisfaction prevents critical examination of whether humility actually serves their interests or primarily benefits those who counsel humility while practicing strategic self-promotion. The satisfaction mechanism ensures that people continue participating in systems that systematically disadvantage them while feeling morally superior for their participation. The humility trap also creates what psychologists call behavioral prediction reliability. Wealthy people can predict and count on poor people's humble responses to maintain social hierarchies. This predictability allows wealthy people to design social and professional systems that assume poor people will accept subordinate positions without challenge or complaint. The reliability of humble responses ensures that social systems can operate with minimal enforcement because behavioral compliance becomes automatic and self-reinforcing. The humility trap ultimately represents one of the most successful examples of how social systems can use virtue signaling to maintain power structures while appearing to promote universal moral development. Understanding this mechanism reveals that genuine social mobility might require strategic confidence and assertiveness rather than the humble acceptance that moral frameworks promote as virtuous behavior. The pattern demonstrates how societies have developed increasingly sophisticated methods for maintaining social hierarchies through moral conditioning that appears beneficial while actually serving elite interests. This moral conditioning operates by convincing subordinate groups that their disadvantageous behavior represents superior character development, rather than systematic social control designed to prevent their advancement. The mechanism ensures that social inequality perpetuates itself through individual moral choices that appear virtuous while systematically reinforcing existing power structures and preventing genuine social mobility. This sophisticated approach to social control demonstrates how modern hierarchies maintain themselves through cultural programming that convinces subordinate groups to voluntarily adopt behaviors that serve elite interests rather than their own advancement. The effectiveness of this programming lies in its ability to frame disadvantageous behaviors as moral virtues, making resistance to the programming feel like moral failure rather than strategic self-interest for subordinate groups. This moral framing creates such powerful psychological barriers that even understanding the mechanism often proves insufficient to overcome the conditioning that maintains hierarchical social relationships. The persistence of this conditioning, despite awareness, demonstrates how deeply embedded social control mechanisms become when they operate through moral rather than coercive frameworks. Hit subscribe if you want more analysis of how moral advice that appears universal actually serves to maintain social hierarchies, and share this with someone who's been told they need to be more humble about their achievements.